Hello, kind greetings. Welcome to the Veterans Among Us, the LGBTQIA Veterans Support Group. We are here to serve you and bring you information, up to date information, relevant information, important information to LGBTQ veterans, allies, and friends. And today we have with us Zander Keig, and he will be talking to us today about the subject of military sexual trauma, which I myself was a victim of, and I will be addressing that as well. So I want to make one small acknowledgement before we start the show, Zander. I would like to raise up prayers for Colin Powell, who passed a couple days ago. He was a very important and influential veteran, and I was very proud to have served during the time that he was serving. So I just want to make that acknowledgement. Zander, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And I would like to pick up exactly where we left off.
Okay.
I remember where we were. Where we were was we were discussing the fact that there is more military sexual trauma among men than there is women, because people don't think about it, but there's 9 men to every 1 servicewoman. So you want to pick up from there and talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. And I'm hopefully I'm also mentioned when that first came up in our last broadcast that it's disproportionate for women in the military because there are so few and it happens so frequently. But the vast number, when you just look at the numbers of people, there's more men. But it happens in a much smaller percentage among men, although it turns out that there's also men who don't report, right? So we really don't know the actual numbers because we don't report. Although in the military, there's 2 levels of reporting, and people who haven't been in the military, at least more recently, don't know that you can report a sexual assault or sexual harassment in 2 ways. One way is identifying who the person is that's harassing or abusing you, and the other way is to not give that information. So I think that opened up the number of people who were going to come forward to disclose that they were being harassed or assaulted in the workplace while serving on active duty. You know, I've had the experience from a few different perspectives. So when I was in the military, I was much younger. I was lesbian. It was before my transition. I'm a trans man for people who didn't, who weren't watching the last broadcast. And so I was myself a victim of military sexual trauma and have been dealing with that. I mean, I was discharged in 1988, so I've been dealing with that for many, many years. And then I became a social worker, and I worked at the VA, where I worked almost entirely with men who were in the Healthcare for Homeless Veterans program. And many of them had military sexual trauma and childhood sexual trauma. And so so it's like my own personal experience, and then also working with veterans as a social worker.
Was that a trigger for you, Zander?
Huh?
Was that a trigger for you?
Well, at first I didn't. I think I was able to intellectualize and compartmentalize and keep myself protected from that. But as time went on, month after month, year after year, it did start to impact me. And so what I decided to do is I shifted out of working at the VA and I went to go work at the Navy because for some reason, I thought that would improve things, but I wanted to stay a federal government social worker. And so it turned out that, I was just experiencing the same thing, except for it was, instead of something that my clients were dealing with in the past, they were dealing with it presently. I'm happy to report, though, that I was working at Naval Medical Center San Diego, or Balboa Hospital, for those of you who are familiar, in San Diego, California. And there were there were psychologists and other licensed mental health providers who worked with the service members who had military sexual trauma. And there was also a group that was for male service members only. And so I was really happy to see that. I could refer my patients to that group. The difference was when I worked at the VA, most of the programming was oriented towards the female veteran. The posters up on the walls only depicted the female veteran. This was back when I was working for them. I'm sure it's different now. And the military sexual trauma coordinators in the 4 different VA clinics I worked in were all women. And so oftentimes when I referred my male veterans over to that program, they would come back feeling like they didn't get the services they needed. So, and I know that that's changed over the last several years because there's been more attention toward the male veteran and service member victims. So,
just to tell you a little bit about my background with MST, in 1980, I was gang raped by 3 male drill sergeants. I was a drill sergeant myself. And as a matter of fact, I was the country's youngest female drill sergeant. And that's part of the reason it happened. They were offended because I was being braggadocious about having made it into the Women's Army Corps as the youngest ever drill sergeant, and that offended them. And so they decided to take me down a notch, as they put it. So I was violated so badly that I had to have a full radical hysterectomy and my gallbladder removed. I was sterile from the time the incident happened. It caused me a lot of damage, emotional damage I can't even describe to you. And it happened in 1980. I am now 61 years old. It's 2021, and I'm still dealing with it. On November 3rd, I finally start EDMR. Is that the correct?
EMDR.
EMDR. Thank you. It didn't sound right. EMDR. And I'm hoping to gain some relief from that. But all these years later, 40 years later, I still have flashbacks. I still have night terrors. You know, I still am dealing with it 40 years later. So I don't think people realize just how serious an impact it can have on your life, not to mention the fact that I was deprived the ability to have children and how that can impact and affect a woman.
Yeah, I mean, my incident was 34 years ago, and I also was just recently approved for EMDR. And I'm also service connected. You know, I'm rated for PTSD as a result of that experience. So I'm, you know, I hope that you are too. I hope you've gone through the process to get rated. Good. You know, there was a time when it was really difficult to get rated by the Department of Veterans Affairs for anything related to MST, because you can't get rated for MST, you know, for that experience. It has to be something attached to it. Post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, whatever it is. Right. It's like the incident itself is not rateable. I think it should be. I think that when something like that happens to us, there should be a compensation. There should be recognition for that. And I think there is, in the sense that there's a lot more attention to it. Every VA healthcare system does have an MST coordinator. There are MST programs now at military hospitals and at military clinics, you know, branch clinics. So there is more attention to it, but still, it's if you have a military sexual trauma incident or incidents, and for some reason you're able to just get over it, you know, I guess maybe some people, you know, they process things differently, then there's nothing to get rated for.
Right. For me, it happened in 1980, and back then the Good Old Boy Network was alive and well. They scrubbed me up, literally hosed me down at the hospital room and scrubbed me down with brushes to get rid of evidence. And then they listed it as an assault rather than what it was, which was a gang rape. They did no rape kit. This was in 1980. They did no rape kit. I had had 4 beers. They said I was too intoxicated to identify my assailants, which were 3 inches from my face, but I guess I couldn't see them because I had had 4 beers. They also implied that it was my fault because I had been drinking. So the men, even if they had done something, were not in the wrong. I put myself in the position of of being sexually abused. And that was their take on it. And so I actually sued in 1999, but I did not win my case on my benefits until 2010. And it was because I got a wonderful lawyer. I'm not going to say his name, but I got a wonderful lawyer from Swords to Plowshares.
Yes.
And he looked through my case and was appalled. He was like, how come this wasn't settled many, many, many years ago? And did you get pain and suffering? And I was like, no, the military doesn't pay pain and suffering. And he says, well, here's what I'm going to do for you. You have 17 and a half years service. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, in an argument with them, say you would not have had a psychotic break if you did not have PTSD and military sexual trauma. And as a result of the psychotic break, you had to leave the military. So my argument is going to be they owe you retirement. You should be able to retire with 20 years under your belt, and they should pay you back pay. I was awarded $101,000 back pay. I am considered retired, and I have 100% rating.
Excellent. It's how many years were you in when that incident occurred?
2.
Yeah. So for me, I was at 2 years in as well. And for me, it was a small boat station in Southern California. I was in the Coast Guard, and it was the commanding officer who at the time it was enlisted. We didn't actually have officers in my station. So the person in command was a chief. And I was the only female in the entire station. So there were a lot of things I was dealing with back at the time. But what was really sad is that I had a dream of serving out 20 or more years in the Coast Guard. I loved being in the military. I had wanted to be in the military since I was a child. My father was a Marine. My Uncle Edward was a Marine. My 3 other uncles were soldiers in the Army. I was all about going. I was following the family into the military. And, when this happened to me, there weren't the different ways to report. I didn't know who to report to. It happened off base because my chief actually had me go to his house to babysit his kids during the summer, which was completely an abuse of my, I was in uniform working at his house as his babysitter during the summer when his kids weren't in school. I mean, it was completely all off regulation, and so I just didn't know what to do. And I injured my knee. And I mean, it was an injury, of course, but nothing really too, it's like it doesn't give me money problems now, but when they said, you're not going to be able to do certain things because of your knee, we're going to give you a medical discharge, I didn't fight it. I just gave up. I gave up and I got out because I just wanted to get away from him. And it was like this sense of betrayal deeper than I can even describe.
No, I can completely comprehend. The 3 drill sergeants that attacked me, one of them helped to get me through drill sergeant school. He was my supervisor. That's why I walked away with them. I was also off base at a trailer park, and they took me into an empty trailer and did what they did. And so the only reason I walked off with them was because he asked me, well, I'm just going to say what happened. He asked me if I wanted to go smoke a joint with him. And back then, Jimmy Carter was president, and you didn't get checked all the time. So I thought, wow, I'm part of the in crowd. They're asking me to go do something with them. Isn't this great? I was 19 years old, or just turned 20, I believe. And I thought, isn't this wonderful? I've finally been accepted. And then they did what they did. And it was like, how? I couldn't even comprehend in my little 19-year-old mind that men could be capable of such a thing.
Yeah.
I couldn't even comprehend it. I was so naive.
Yeah, I think I was fairly naive too. Although prior to enlisting in the Coast Guard, I was in relationship with a woman who was a little bit older than I was. She was a veteran. She had served in the army, in military police, and I was raised. I can't say my childhood wasn't ideal, but I wasn't raised around anybody who had addiction issues, and so I didn't know how to recognize addiction or alcoholism. And so I got into a relationship with this much older woman who turns out had an alcohol problem and was very controlling and physically and sexually abusive. But I didn't know how to wrap my mind around that I was in a relationship with a woman and that a woman was doing that.
Right.
And so I think I don't know how to talk about it really, but it somehow I don't think I was desensitized, but I think that threw me off so much that I wasn't paying attention. Like I wasn't heeding warning signs. I don't think I was as conscientious of signs that were saying like, no, you
Red
probably
flag.
shouldn't do that. And yeah, red flags. And also like, you don't say no to the commanding officer.
Right.
Right. When the commanding officer says you report to my house at 0700, I got in my car, I drove, and I showed up. Like I didn't know I wasn't supposed to be babysitting his kids. I didn't know he was abusing his power. I didn't know that he was going off regulation. Like I trusted him, right? I'm sure you trusted, right? You trusted these gentlemen, well, these men, right?
Yes, I did with all my heart. Like I said,
right.
they had gotten me through the school. There were times going through the school, it was very difficult to be 19 and become a drill sergeant.
Yeah.
There were challenges that I faced. And when I came up against the wall a couple times, it was my main perpetrator that pushed me forward and said, you can do this. And then he turned around when he raped me and said, I raped Viet Cong women in the past that were nothing, and you're nothing just like them. You're nothing. You're nobody. And I have complete control over you. And I'm going to show you what women are for in the military. You're here to serve men. And that's the kind of mind games he was playing with me.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's
so total switch. So when you talk about betrayal, total switch. I didn't even recognize the man I was looking at when the rape started. I didn't even, his facial features, didn't even recognize him because he was so twisted and contorted with hatred.
Yeah, it's a kind of betrayal that's really hard to describe to other people, because sometimes when I don't talk about this very often, quite frankly, and the fact that I'm talking about it even on a podcast that's live, this is very out of the ordinary for me. I don't tend to talk about this topic, but it's important, and so I wanted to be able to talk about it. And, especially as a trans man, the expectation, the assumption is that, people just see me and they say, oh, that's a man. That person doesn't know anything about being vulnerable or being a target of abuse. And it's like, well, yes, I do. And so do men who are not trans either, right? Like, I have much more empathy now toward and for men, knowing that the possibility exists that they're behaving the way they're behaving because they themselves were victimized. And I saw that we had a question actually from Adam talking about, is it true that most abusers were abused themselves? I mean, I think we have to be really careful in how we talk about that. It's like, not everybody who is abused becomes an abuser, but I think it is fairly common that those people who go on to abuse in any way, abuse drugs and alcohol, abuse people emotionally, mentally, physically, sexually, were probably in some way or another mistreated poorly, treated very poorly. But I don't think it's like, I don't think it's one for the other. I don't think like if you're physically abused, you become a physical abuser. If you were sexually abused, you become a sexual abuser. I think that the kind of abuse that occurs and the kind of abuse that we may then go on to, like for myself, like I did become a person who misused drugs and alcohol. I never got to the point of addiction where I needed treatment, and I did become a person who was very closed off. And it's hard to be in a relationship with somebody who's really closed off and very suspicious and always expecting that the other shoe's going to drop, right? Like that's not a kind of person that's a pleasure to be in relationship with. So for many, many years, it kept me out of being able to have loving relationships, because
Not just loving,
I was
Zander, but
suspicious of
healthy.
people. Yeah,
Not
healthy, right?
healthy
Because
relationships.
and because as a lesbian, it wasn't because like I was in a relationship with men. It was because I had that abuse from that female partner, and then I had the abuse from the male commanding officer, and like I didn't know how to make heads or tails of people. Period. For many
Right.
years. For many years. So
That's easily understood. Can we talk a little bit more about your experience with Navy and personnel in general that were males that experienced MST, and how you think that has changed from the time of your incident, which was, you said, 1988,
yes.
till now? Because for me, there
Yeah.
was no MST teams in 1980. There was no such thing.
Yeah. Not in
I was
'88
still a WAC.
either.
They don't even have WACs anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Things are very different in the sense that, in the Department of Veterans Affairs, there is a position called an MST coordinator, and every VA healthcare system has one, at least, MST coordinator. And a healthcare system, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is made up of a hospital and all of its outpatient or community-based outpatient clinics, right, or rural clinics. And then within the military, when I was working as a clinical social work case manager at Balboa Hospital in San Diego, there were people that were in the mental health department on base who were trained specifically to deal with MST from a bunch of different angles. So we had mental health providers who did individual counseling, and they did group therapy with male survivors and female survivors. And for transgender service members, they just picked which group they went into, because the military is very binary like that, right? And then they also had special teams of people who would be called to like the on-base emergency room if they needed to do like a rape kit examination. If a military person or a dependent was sexually assaulted out in the community, the community hospitals would call the base person to have them come, to be there as like the liaison. And then, of course, there's the ability to file a VA claim, and you can do VA claims now before you even get out of the military. Another thing that's happening now, because maybe it would have been available to me if I had reported it, but I didn't, is now whether you report it identifying or not identifying who the perpetrator or perpetrators are, they'll send you to a new command. Like you'll just be moved. Right? You get to go, and it's not like they send you to some remote place. They say, where do you want to go? They find a place for you, right? To get you away from that person, from that environment, from all the reminders of that incident. So that's very different. Another thing is that the perpetrators of military sexual trauma, it's equal opportunity. There are men and women who sexually harass and sexually assault service members, both male and female, and trans, and maybe they're non-binary identifying, but there's not really a non-binary category, so to speak, in the military. But so basically it's not as if it's only men perpetrating against women. It could be women perpetrating against women, against men, men against men. I had a close friend that he was in the Navy. He was gay. He was sexually assaulted by a higher up, a person in his command. He started abusing alcohol, and then he was thrown out of the military and got other than honorable discharge. And he lost all of his VA benefits. He lost his access to GI bills, right? All kinds of, the money for college. And so I worked with him for quite a while to help him, file a claim and get that character of discharge changed. and to get rated and to get some of those benefits back. He would have never been dishonorably or other than honorably discharged if he hadn't have been assaulted and started to drink to numb his pain.
Yeah, I took that course as well, but I was able to completely quit drinking by age 25, and I now have 36 years of sobriety. But it didn't come easy, because what I wanted to do was not just drink, but I wanted to drink to the point of blacking out so that I would be able to sleep through the night without a flashback, so I wouldn't have night terrors. And that was my way of coping, was to become an alcoholic. I come from a family of alcoholics, so it was very easy to assume that role. But even the way that they rate you with PTSD and other mental health issues, I also am listed as bipolar, and yet I've only ever had one manic episode. Really, it's that I suffer from clinical depression. But they label you so that when I went to court with this wonderful lawyer I told you about, the first thing they said was, look at her mental health conditions. She's not a competent witness. She's crazy. And it was like my lawyer stood up so quick and was like, excuse me, and handled it right away and nipped it in the bud before they could try to take that track. But that's what they tried to do, was humiliate and embarrass me when I was answering questions. They kept on going back to, so how long have you been suffering from mental health issues? They just kept bringing it up instead of saying you have PTSD as a result of a military sexual trauma, which is what my lawyer kept saying.
Yeah, I mean, for many years, they found out that for many years, any male veteran that was seeking to be rated for PTSD or other issues related to their MST, because there's also, like you said, there's physical damage, right? And so you can also get rated for the physical damage that happens to your body, whether, for you, the total hysterectomy, that should be rated, right? All those body parts have numbers attached to them. And so when I was working with some of these men in the VA, I learned from a handful of them that they had put in claims and they were denied outright. They said, you have no evidence, but it turns out you don't actually need evidence. That's part of the MST. It's like you have to be able to demonstrate that you're having the problems you're having with anxiety or depression or post-traumatic stress or whatever it is. You're having difficulty functioning in your life, in your work, in your relationships, but you don't have to, quote, prove the MST. It doesn't have to be in your record, right? So they changed that.
Hey, Maureen, can you hear me?
Yes.
This sounds like a personal call. And
yeah. Hold on. I'll be there in just a minute. I'll be there in just a minute. I'm on. Okay. Just mute my mic, please. Okay. I'm sorry, Zander. I have a Zoom call coming in at the same time, and it just overlapped into our conversation. That's what happened. Would you look to your right and see that there's a question that's been posted by Chaplain PJ about abusive relationships?
I didn't know she was talking to you, Josh, or...
No, I'm talking to Zander. You need to...
So I'm looking at the questions. We answered the one that was about, is it true that that people who were abused become abusers? I think most people who were abused do not become abusers. But people who do abuse probably had some kind of abuse in their history, whether it's being raised by a parent who abused alcohol or drugs, was physically abusive, emotionally abusive, mentally abusive. So there's not a direct correlation with all abusers having been abused.
How are you, Brother Zander? My apologies.
I'm doing very well.
For the delay. It is good to see you. You are looking awesome. The question that I was raising, however, is from Adam, and is it normal to have PTSD after a narcissistic abusive relationship? Have you touched on that at all?
No, I didn't see that question.
Okay. I
Um,
think it came from the same person.
I think, quite honestly, being in a relationship with somebody who's either, clinically a narcissist, has narcissistic personality disorder, or has a lot of narcissistic traits, can be a very, very crazy making relationship. Because if you're familiar with the concept of gaslighting, right? And if you've ever seen the movie where that term comes from, gaslighting, when you have a sense that something is true, and or you can see something or you've heard something, and you constantly have a person telling you that didn't happen, you're crazy, you didn't see what you saw, or you get a sense that maybe somebody is cheating in the relationship, and you bring it to their attention that you have concerns about this, and they say, how dare you accuse me of such a thing, and then you find out they were cheating because you got the sense, the little hairs on the back of your neck stood up.
Yes.
So I think it is possible for people to have such a traumatic experience, and it can be not, this narcissism can come from a parent, right? A mother or a father, another guardian, right? A family member or a grandparent or even a foster parent. It can also come from a romantic relationship, right? A partner, a spouse. So it's a very, very damaging kind of relationship. It's very traumatic for the person who is on the receiving end of that. And I don't see why, not everybody, of course, because not everybody who has trauma develops post-traumatic stress. Almost everybody who goes through trauma has acute stress disorder. Acute stress disorder is just your natural response to the overwhelm from the experience. It only becomes post-traumatic stress when it goes past a certain period of time, and then it's diagnosed. But almost everybody has acute stress disorder. For example, I was in a car accident once, and it took me about 2 weeks to get my bearings. I was like afraid to leave the house. I mean, I didn't leave the house.
Sure.
I didn't get out of my pajamas. I was afraid to get back in the car. It took me another couple of weeks to feel safe driving on the freeway again, where I had been in an accident. That's acute stress disorder. That's normal. It becomes post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic stress when it exceeds that normal range of like that 30 days of your body and your brain acclimating. Because when you go through a traumatic experience, all your whole body and your brain are flooded with stress hormones. And so it does throw things off of whack,
Would you submit that all of the service members from as far back as Vietnam, what percentage, how do we even guesstimate what percentage of our service members who served in Vietnam, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Gulf, and Afghanistan, of those three conflicts, we're probably talking about what, 300,000 service members, combining those three, maybe 400,000 service members.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But a guesstimate of what percentage has mental health issues and what percentage have PTSD. Because when Chaplain Mo was talking about being bipolar, and I've been diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic, and in terms of the PTSD, there are a whole list of things for which I've been diagnosed. So and this is just a question that I'm throwing out in terms of approximation, nothing permanent, but out of 400,000 service members, would you say at least 70%, 80%?
I honestly have no idea.
Okay.
Because what some of the factors here are, when they look at, a lot of times they'll say, we don't know who's going to develop PTSD. It's like, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. All you have to do is know what kind of childhood a person had. If a person has a multitude of adverse childhood experiences, and anybody can go and look at the adverse childhood experiences study that was originally done in San Diego through Kaiser Permanente, and is now part of the CDC, or Center for Disease Control. If you go and look at the adverse childhood experiences, if you take that 10-question questionnaire, survey questionnaire for, your adverse childhood experiences, we know that if you have 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, you're more than likely to end up with addiction, experiencing homelessness, interpersonal violence, addicted to nicotine, obese, with diabetes, heart disease, right? It's a total causal relationship. Total.
And when you add sexual assault to that.
Yeah, it's right. And so, they've done some documentaries specifically looking at male and female service members talking about being sexually assaulted, more than sexually harassed, but sexually assaulted. And they went pretty far back. And so there were men and women from all these different eras talking about that experience. So we know that it's been happening probably since, the military, right? Because if it happens in society, it'll happen in the military and vice versa, right? The military is like what? It's 2 to 5 or maybe 2 to 7% of people in the United States serve in the military. So it's a small percentage of primarily U.S. citizens who serve in the military. There are non-citizens who get into the military, but when we just think about United States citizens, so we don't know why everybody's going into the military for different reasons. And some people are escaping abuse and then they just don't know how to process it. It may get in their way, right, while they're serving, and they may be victims of abuse. And then when they go into the military, they're victimized even more, right? We know that's the case, right? It happens not always, but child victims are more than likely to become adult victims.
So I suspect then that this sexual assault is not only physical. Would you agree that for the most part it's physical? Can it be social? Can it be mental? When I say mental, I mean the innuendos.
Oh, sure. Yeah, military sexual trauma covers assault and harassment. Okay. And so under the harassment part, that's the, that's the inappropriate comments, that's the suggestive comments, that's the, pictures up on the wall, that's the flirtation without consent, that's the, making threats or offers of, I'll do this if you do that. So that's all covered. MST covers the assault and the harassment.
Okay. Can you put in the chat or say again where we can find that reference, that study?
The ACEs.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah. So it's the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study at the CDC. Adverse childhood experience. Yeah.
Okay, great. Does it state anything about this in relation to how many of these adverse childhood experiences have gone into the military? Is it broken down like that?
No, because when you're going through, right, when you're going through MEPS, when you're going through military entrance processing, they don't ask about these things. I think that would be a good indicator, right? So when they say, we don't know who's going to develop PTSD, it's like, well, this would be a good way to keep track of things. Like, give everybody the 10-question adverse childhood experiences study questionnaire, keep that on file. And then if they develop PTSD, you can, pull them up together. So it's, that I think that would help, because it was explained to me this way when I was a social work intern at the VA in the psychiatric unit. in San Diego, my supervisor explained it to me this way. It's like, if you think of like a beaker, right? Think in the science lab, you've got this glass jar, right? This beaker, and you're filling it with fluid, right? And so let's say every adverse childhood experience, you pour a little in, you pour a little in, you pour a little in. Some people are going into the military at age 18, 19, 20, 21, and they've got like, this much liquid in their 8 ounces. They've got like an ounce or two in there. Some people are coming in, they're at the fill line, and anything that happens to them while they're in the military overflows, right? So if you've got really, if you score very high on the adverse childhood experiences study, and then you go into the military and you deal with combat and you deal with sexual harassment and then maybe sexual assault, that's going to push you over the edge as compared to somebody who maybe had like maybe 0 to 1, adverse childhood experience. And then they go into the military, they have combat trauma, they have military sexual trauma. They may still have PTSD, but it might not manifest so profoundly. It might not be as severe, right? Another factor to consider, at least from the clinical side of things, is to think about what's called attachment, right? If we have healthy attachments to at least one adult in our formative years, then we're less likely to develop like very significantly pronounced issues with negative trauma response, because we learn through a healthy attachment with an adult care provider, caregiver. For me, it was like a school teacher. It can be anybody that is safe for you and is in your life for a long enough period of time that you can attach to them in a healthy emotional way. Is what it does is it teaches you how to regulate your own emotions, right? And so part of the issue with post-traumatic stress is that our emotions become overwhelming and we can't figure out how to regulate them. And if we don't have the skill set to do it, and we haven't been patched into some sort of treatment program, then we're not going to get the assistance in helping us regulate them, right? Emotions are just natural. They're going to come and go like the waves in the ocean. And we can either be taken down and pulled out like the tide, or we can learn how to get on a surfboard and surf those emotions like waves, right? We have the capacity to do that. We can build resiliency, right? That's what I do. That's part of my job. My day job is helping people with that.
So is there a process to that, or over time? How does a person, is there training? Were you trained for that? Is this something
Absolutely.
that you learned along the way?
Absolutely. It's called cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy. And both of them are incorporative of mindfulness practices, and also paying attention to every thought we have is not actually accurate. It's not correct. We don't have to believe it. We can challenge our own thoughts. We can do that. They're called cognitive distortions. And a cognitive behavioral therapist teaches their clients and their patients and their consumers how to recognize a cognitive distortion like catastrophizing or personalizing. There's a whole list of them. And so it's fairly common that if we have a trauma history, whether it's in our childhood, our adolescence, or our adult, or all three, right, in our adulthood, or all three of those periods of our life, then it's going to be more difficult for us to recognize that we have a cognitive distortion, that we're catastrophizing. Everything we see, everywhere we look is bad. People are bad. Everything's negative. That's catastrophizing. That's a cognitive distortion. That's not reality. That's just a perception. So we learn to identify the difference between a perception and reality, and we challenge the perception. Because if we don't challenge the perception, then we're going to act as if it's reality, and then that's going to disrupt our ability to have a good job, a good relationship, a solid connection with friends, with our family members. It's going to get in the way, right? So a cognitive behavioral therapist, the only difference between cognitive behavioral therapist and a dialectical behavioral therapist is dialectical behavioral therapists there's a much more pronounced emphasis on the mindfulness practices, on breathing, on learning how to navigate distress. It's used a lot with people who are either diagnosed bipolar borderline personality disorder, or people who have borderline personality traits that are getting in their way of having a functional, being functional in their occupation, their relationship, or their life in general, right? So that'd be the main difference.
So I'm gonna stretch a little bit here in terms of sexual assaults.
Yeah.
In the military.
Yeah.
As related to our being labeled abominators in relation to sexual assault in the military.
Okay.
I'm speaking of the Sodom and Gomorrah narrative.
Okay.
That is so very often, and I'm doing my best to connect it with sexual assault in the military, because in my mind, even though I haven't quite made the connection, in my mind, there is a connection between particularly same gender loving folk and trans folk. There is a connection between the church using the Sodom and Gomorrah story to label us as an abomination in the sight of God. So if I cannot go to God, if God sees me as an abomination, then am I getting what I deserve when I'm sexually assaulted in the military? Now that's I know that's broad.
Well, yeah, but I mean, what comes up for me is we're talking about shame, right? So the internalization, because if our very existence as LGBT people is likened to the sodomites, right, the unclean, the those who should be killed, right, then, and we're seen as less than, therefore people can take advantage of us, they can abuse us, and who cares? Because we're not worth anything anyways. Some people are going to internalize that, right? They're going to have shame, right? My wife likes to tell me the difference between guilt and shame is guilt tells you you're about to do something wrong. Shame says you're a bad person, you're wrong, right? So we have to keep, so people who internalize those messages that are coming from their church and their family, and then they go into the military and then something terrible happens to them, and they probably can see it through that same lens, which is, well, it's because I'm bad. It's because I'm unworthy. Not all people, of course, because like me, I don't internalize things like that. I don't really deal with shame. I don't consider myself a bad person. I never have. I was raised Roman Catholic, but the shame part was never part of my upbringing. But guilt is healthy in the sense that it keeps you from behaving incorrectly, right, and doing bad things. But that doesn't mean you're a bad person. But if you believe you're a bad person and something bad happens to you, then you can further internalize that. And then they call that a shame spiral, right? And then somebody in a shame spiral is probably not going to report it because they think they're culpable. Oh, I must have done something. It's my fault, right? Like Chaplain she was blamed for it. And we never got to talking about, did she believe them? Right? Because not all people are, right? People who don't have shame aren't going to believe it's your responsible. They're not going to believe it usually. Right?
Well, this business of sexual assault in the military is so I really don't want to call it pervasive. Maybe it is isolated, but there certainly seems to be an awful lot of conversation still going on in the military around the subject of sexual assault, so much so that I suspect we will have you for a third time as soon as you are available, and maybe even as soon as next week, primarily because we're getting ready to go into a season when November, Thanksgiving, December, Christmas, January, New Year, when people who have and people who have not been sexually assaulted lean toward suicide. So we may have a mixture of, can being sexually assaulted in the military be a primary source for people who have been sexually assaulted? I mean, is it one of many reasons? Not to talk about tonight, but
yeah,
to talk about perhaps next week. And one of the other questions that we want to also make certain that Chaplain Maureen did not take that internally. And, she and I had a conversation last week, and what came up was how we are viewed as mentally incompetent and therefore not as appreciated as military chaplains, or as, in our case, as military chaplains, because we have been abused, and we find ourselves not being taken seriously.
Sure.
Because people think we're crazy.
Yeah, dismissed.
And yes, we are dismissed, and I find that to be quite painful. I keep doing the work that I do here among my civilian clergy folk, and really got on this past Saturday because I had sent out a survey to 300 people, and maybe I got 25, 35 responses. I said, do you folks understand that it's not just the military folk that are under attack, but all of us are under attack post misogynistic commander in chief. And I think I'm rambling right now because I've gotten a little bit off of sexual assault, but then I think about the mental assaults, that are coming. I guess it would be sexual harassment as opposed to sexual assault. But there are some loose ends that I need to tie up in conversation with you. So if you are available next Tuesday, oops, I got wait. Let me run that by the administrator, because we
That's
had
right.
said. I just remembered.
Check the Sue.
She is amazing. I love her. Have we had a break tonight?
No,
Okay, then
we're about to wrap up. If you.
Yes. Are there any announcements that we need to make, Pastor Sue?
You know what? I'll just throw them up on the screen. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so I will just, I'll put them up.
Okay.
And it's just really centered on us. So those of you who are watching, we thank you for joining us. We're here on Tuesdays at 7:00 Eastern Standard Time. The Veteran Among Us, LGBTQIA Veterans Plus National Veteran Support Group. You can find us on Facebook. Our Facebook page is TFAN Veterans. That's if you're watching us from YouTube. You can find us on Facebook at TFAN Veterans. And we also invite you to join the TFAN Veterans group on Facebook at TFAN Veterans Group. And quickly support us, support our broadcast by sending us a Cash App to Veteran Among Us. To Veteran Among Us at Cash App. It's so nice, I did it twice. Wanted to make sure that you got it. So please support our broadcast I love the fact that we're family, that we can laugh on air. Support our broadcast by sending a donation to Veteran Among Us. And that's all the announcements for tonight. I do want to say thank you to Zander. Thank you so much, Zander, for your transparency, um, uh, vulnerability at some points, and for your wisdom. And I learned so much from you. I love sitting in the back and hanging out in the back because I get to glean all of this stuff 20 seconds before the audience does. But yes, so thank you so much
You're welcome.
for coming back on the show again, and we look forward to having
Absolutely.
you back. Thank you.
It's been a joy. I look forward to coming back again.
Well, you'll be hearing from Pastor Sue as soon as we can bring you back on a Tuesday. And I too not must, but I too express my gratitude. You are quite brilliant, and it's got a touch of anointing to it. If you understand what what I mean, it's almost like you eat, sleep, and eat, sleep, and sleep and eat and sleep again. You know your business, and that is so wonderful to be with someone like you. Uh, that you're called. It's clear that you are called to this work, as Pastor Sue has so graciously posted in the private chat. And yes, you are called, you are anointed, and appointed, I might say. You are doing what you are born to do. And
It definitely feels that way to me too. So it's nice to hear that reflected back. It's
yes.
it was kind of a meandering path to get here. I did go to seminary, and I had the idea to become, a chaplain or a minister. And then I decided to become a clinical social worker. And
Yes.
I really feel like there were so many ministers and chaplains in, or I should say, there were so many therapists in seminary, and a lot of people I met in seminary are now therapists.
Okay.
There were also a lot of lawyers in seminary,
Mm-hmm.
and math teachers, interestingly enough. So there's it's for me, it's like I bring that in, right? I bring the spirituality component into the work that I do,
Mm-hmm.
just in a different way, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
I will also share with you that the United Black Christians of the United Church of Christ has sent $500 to Space for Grace Without Walls, and Space for Grace Without Walls is going to sponsor a luncheon, a brunch for all of the veterans that here in the city of Lansing. That's what we're going to use the funds for. And we're looking at doing it on Veterans Day.
Oh, very good.
And so if you're in the area, stop by.
That's Michigan, right?
That's Lansing, Michigan, no
Yes.
less.
That's a far way from Orlando, Florida.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But we do want the listening and viewing audience to know that the veteran among us, LGBTQIA+, in our capacity as a support group, it is our intention to bring to light as many persons who are enlightened to this broadcast, because we need it. As veterans, we need it. This is all about veterans and veterans' families, and as much information as we can pass on to you to make your life better, to make our life better. We will intentionally do that. As many of you or most of you know, we lost an incredible officer, General Colin Powell, and I had the privilege of meeting him during Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Didn't have the mindset to have a photo with him, but he is indeed among the best of us. It seems to me that somewhere he said, "I really don't like war. I would much rather we find a different way, a diplomatic way of having peace in this world." And you're not going to find many generals or admirals or senior officers that's going to say that. But I will miss him. We will miss his influence. And we thank God for ending tonight, celebrating the life of General Colin Powell. Make it a good one. Make every day a good one, my fellow veterans. If it's not going good, just change the way you're thinking. Isn't that right, sir?
Yes, it's not as easy as that sounds, but we can get to there. Yes, with a lot of work.
Yes. It's a lot of work, but it makes a difference in the long run. It really this thing of mindfulness and meditation on good things. So, my hairdresser said to me earlier this afternoon, "If it ain't good, it ain't God." So there you have it.
There, that's it. That's a good way to end.
That's a great way to end. And may this good God be with you, and may you be with this good God.
Thank you. Also with you.
Good night.